And so it's just like, wow, the fairies are using computers these days. Everybody's on the internet. Alright, welcome to another episode of Inspired Content. We're doing another couple of stories from the collection of World's Best Science Fiction from 1969 and A Wizard's Dozen. The two stories this time are Masks from World's Best Science Fiction and Come Hither from A Wizard's Dozen. Now I'm gonna say right out the bat that both of these really seemed lacking to me. They seemed very oversimplistic and very formulaic. Masks I gave a 3.4 out of a 3.9 because quite frankly it's just another one of those no lead up, just some random guy is for no explained reason the subject of a test that makes him as inhuman as they could imagine by putting his brain into a complete prosthetic body. And then they just proceed to go with like, this is what happens when you are no longer human and you become some kind of monstrous being. And it's just like, it struck me as a poor way to go with that story, but it's been a few decades since then. Perhaps the time it was a newer concept, less common, a trope, but it just fell short for me. And Come Hither was really just every story you've ever heard of a child or a person who gets into business, gets into other people's business and gets kind of in trouble, and then they find a doorway into fairy realm, and that fairy realm, they're there, they get caught in a party, and they leave the party, and the whole world has moved on without them for a period of time longer than the time they thought they were in the fairy realm. It's pretty much just that. And so I gotta give that a 4.4 out of a 4.8, only because really the only difference they used in that was the portal that the person found was a computer. And so it's just like, wow, the fairies are using computers these days. Everybody's on the internet. It just seems sort of a disappointing approach to doing that. But the ideas they inspired could be kind of fun. A person's brain is put into a robotic prosthetic, and she seems to withdraw into studying and maintaining herself before she suddenly changes and becomes a very domestic person while becoming non-verbal. So they're worried that perhaps she is, mentally collapsing from being enclosed in this non-human shell. Only she hasn't. She swapped her mind into one of the house maintenance droids to escape the sterile bubble that she was forced to live inside of, to get out into the world and see the things that the world is made of again. A person in a prosthetic body takes up painting portraits and is especially skilled at it with the use of their robotic senses and fine motor controls. And they then begin to paint various masks of people, and they're so realistic that they can impersonate these people, so long as the masks don't have to move. A person in a robotic body seems perfectly well adapting after a time, and forming relationships, creating art, doing all the things that a well-adjusted human being does in their life. And then they go in for a maintenance check, upon which time it is discovered that the brain has in fact died. And the person who's doing these things was the rudimentary augmenting sensory feedback systems of the robotic prosthetic body gaining self-awareness, but not knowing it isn't the person that was put into it. It still thinks it's that person. is it? Can a mind transfer over to a digital medium? Or is this just an AI who got so used to being a being acting this way that when the being died, it just kept thinking it was that person? And these are the come hither reactions. A girl finds a secret doorway to fairyland, and it leads to 3 doors, like it occurs in this story. But in this case, one door leads to the wild woods that they came from. One door leads to the glittering palace that the party takes place in, same as the story. And the 3rd door leads to a dungeon in which a young girl who looks just like her is kept, slaving away at some process. And this is how she discovers she is a changeling, and the elves came to take her back, and the girl she was to replace is in the dungeon doing something only a human can do, and that's why they traded. Same story as number 4, except for the 3rd door in this case holds a set that looks exactly like her home, with costumes that look exactly like her family, and she discovers that all of it is fake, put on by mystical creatures to soothe this captured human child in some sort of like zoo, sort of like zoos will keep baby birds trained and learning to function by using puppets to mimic the mother bird. The 3rd door in this case leads to a second fairy court, this one the dark fairy court, and she finds a little bit of herself in each of the fairy courts before returning back to the human world, changed for the experience. It's sort of a little bit of Dante's Inferno and Dante's Paradise, but in this case it's a little less about seeing what the places have and reporting it back, and a little more about seeing the reflection of one's own self in these places and coming to grips with them. So these are the ideas I got from these stories. Hopefully there's some inspiration in there, and I will see you for the next episode.